So, first of all, welcome everybody to the military pageant. Got lots of warbirds. I get the pleasure very occasionally of flying certainly the earliest warbird that flew during the Second World War, and a lot of people forget that this aeroplane, Gloster Gladiator, was actually operational during the Battle of Britain. So it wasn't just Spitfires and Hurricanes. We also had 2 squadrons of Gladiators defending Portsmouth docks. I have to say that if I'd been allocated a Gladiator and was going to war against a Messerschmitt 109, I would have been slightly less than happy. But bear in mind that this aeroplane in 1934 was seen as the ultimate frontline fighter. We'd been operating Gloster Gauntlets as our main fighter force, and Gloucesters took it upon themselves to produce a super gauntlet, and it turned out to be the Gladiator. Once it was actually underway as a design, the government got behind it and produced a specification around the aeroplane that Gloucesters were building. And ultimately they finished up putting this aeroplane into service in 1937. Unfortunately, of course, by 1937 we'd got Spitfires and Hurricanes, and it was pretty obvious that the day of the biplane was over. That having been said, we were committed to production and ultimately finished up building about 750 Gladiators. A lot of those aeroplanes went into squadron service with the Royal Air Force, but the others were used as export fighters, and we sold them around the world. So there was quite a good market for Gladiators, and people like Russia and China all used, and the Norwegians, they were very famous with the Norwegian Air Force, they all used Gladiators as their frontline fighters. So by the beginning of the Second World War, when the RAF went out to France, they took Gladiators and Hurricanes with them, and the Gladiators were fairly heavily mauled by fighters, but there was still a reasonable aeroplane to shoot down bombers. So as an aeroplane for the Royal Air Force, it was too late. We'd moved on by the time that this appeared, but for lots of other air forces it became their frontline fighter. This particular aeroplane is one of 2 aircraft that were built very late and really not used, and ultimately were purchased after the war by a guy called Viv Bellamy. His son's still around, but Viv bought the 2 aeroplanes. I think he paid 200 quid for the pair of them, and built this aeroplane out of the bits from both. One aeroplane was just used as a source of spares. Interestingly enough, that aeroplane is now flying over at Duxford. Having bought the thing and flown it a little while, Viv decided that even in the late 40s, it was an expensive aeroplane to operate as a private machine. Bear in mind that the engine is bigger than a Merlin, so in terms of capacity, so it's not going to be cheap to operate even then. And he managed to sell the aeroplane back to Gloucester's, which was a bit of a coup, and Gloucester's put it on charge as one of their display aircraft, and it flew happily with a guy, their chief test pilot, Dickie Martin, who also happened to be a pilot here, flew the aeroplane for Gloucester's and subsequently Hawker Siddeley for a good many years, in fact until 1960. And in 1960, Hawker Siddeley decided that they were going to close their historic operation and donated the aeroplane, probably with Dickie Martin's help, to the Shuttleworth collection. And it's been here as an operational aeroplane ever since. In terms of a collection aeroplane, well, I'll tell you a story. In 1999, I was just about to become a collection pilot. I've flown here with privately operated aeroplanes for a good many years. And one of our commentators at the time was a guy by the name of David Ogilvie. I don't know whether any of you remember David Ogilvie, but he was actually the general manager for the collection for many years. And David had retired as general manager and become a commentator. And he looked at me very sternly and he said, "Robert, in the very unlikely chance that you ever get to fly this aeroplane, you'll probably find that it's the best aeroplane in the collection." Well, I haven't flown the Hurricane, I haven't flown the Spitfire, but they better be good. Because this is a magnificent flying aeroplane. It's the ultimate flying biplane fighter. All of the knowledge that sort of appeared from the First World War through the 30s as to how to build a high-performance biplane, everything's in this particular aeroplane. It's, well, I'm a civilian, but I'm guessing that in the 1930s it was a fighter pilot's dream. It's got a huge amount of power, it's wildly overpowered. For those of you that are familiar with modern light aircraft, it's the biggest Pitts Special that's ever been built. It's an 850 horsepower Pitts Special. And in the air, it's an utter joy to fly. It does exactly what you tell it. It's got no wayward tendencies whatsoever. It's a good gun platform. You can point it very easily. You don't have to fight the controls at all. It's slightly heavy, particularly when it's going fast, and bear in mind for a biplane it will go fast. It'll do 250 miles an hour, so it will easily keep up with our Hawker Hurricane, which is a Hurricane 1 of course. So it's lovely in the air. The snag is you've got to get it in the air and you've got to get it back on the ground, and there's the story. This aeroplane has been known to make grown test pilots weep. I always think it's a bit like Muttley out of Dick Dastardly. It will bite your bum and snigger while it's doing it. So if you haven't been bitten by the Gladiator, you will be ultimately. It's got very tricky ground handling, and the result of that is that you will not see the aeroplane thrashed into the sky with huge fistfuls of throttle. Because if you put the power on with this aeroplane too rapidly, it will swap ends. It's as simple as that. It will ground loop on takeoff and has done on many occasions. In fact, on one famous occasion, it ground looped going down the hill here and took out the VIP enclosure. We were very fortunate that there were no VIPs in it at the time, but it is worth bearing in mind that if you see the aeroplane accelerating very slowly on takeoff, that's because it's only just under control. It's a big engine, a lot of torque, a lot of swing, and for those of you that are probably aero modelers, you will probably see that the undercarriage is an awful long way forward ahead of the centre of gravity. That gives it's very stable at low speed on the ground. You can taxi it and it's not going to tip on its nose. But as you open the throttle, it will try and swap ends. So we get airborne very carefully. Once the aeroplane leaves the ground, everything straightens up and it's a joy. And off you go and you fly the aeroplane. And normally we have a great deal of fun flying the aeroplane, with the knowledge that at some point you're going to have to come back and put the thing on the ground. And then it turns a very serious enterprise. So you need to get your brain into gear straight away. Having roared around the trees with it, you've now got to think about putting the thing on the ground. It's absolutely critical on speed. It's absolutely critical on wind direction. You really need to land this aeroplane into wind or with a crosswind from the left. Crosswind from the right, you will go round. So it's critically important that you look at the windsock and land appropriately to the wind direction. The worst thing is that the initial approach is easy and it will touch down quite satisfactorily, but it's the last 5 miles an hour. So watch carefully. Not the first part of the landing, the very last bit. And the giveaway will be the rudder, and you'll watch the rudder. It'll be a blur of action because you'll be using the rudder, using the brakes. It's got compressed air brakes, so it has a trigger like a Spitfire or any other contemporary fighters of the period. It has a trigger on the control column. You squeeze the trigger and that applies brake. So as you then apply rudder, you get brake on that side. And you will see a lot of action going on in the last 5 minutes. The airplane's highly aerobatic, but you won't see it being flown aerobatically. And that's not because it's not capable of being flown aerobatics or not cleared for aerobatics. It is cleared for aerobatics, but we choose not to fly aerobatics in it. And that's because until very recently, it was the only flying survivor. And what we don't want to do is put a piece of what is effectively national heritage at any risk whatsoever. The Bristol Mercury has a carburettor which is, for those of you that are interested, it's a Claudel Hobson carburettor which is very prone to rich cuts or negative G cuts. So if you were to inadvertently cause any negative G or zero G doing aerobatics, the engine will cut instantly. It should pick up again, normally with a big sheet of flame, but sometimes it doesn't. And you would not want to force land this particular aeroplane. So we choose not to fly aerobatics with it. If you want to see aerobatics in a Gladiator, then the one that's operated at Duxford is flown very energetically, and it does show just what the aeroplane is capable of. And of course, during the 1930s, it was the aeroplane of choice from the Royal Air Force for their formation aerobatic team. And in fact, famously, the aeroplane appeared at the Hendon Air Shows as a three-ship, as a tied-together formation. So they took off tied together, they flew a complete aerobatic routine, still tied together, and they landed tied together. And that sort of indicates the handling qualities of the aeroplane. It is as close to being perfect as you will ever want to find. And Paul's about to fly it this afternoon for the first time, so he's going to find out just what a good aeroplane it is.
About the landing. No pressure.